Chapter 8. When Teferi sent Baron to the blimp hangar construction site on the eastern frontier, the wizard considered himself fortunate. Baron's task was to learn all he could about the systems supporting Teferi's military and to perhaps adapt what he had learned to Urza's forces. The building of a new hangar complex gave him that chance. Teferi was kind enough to walk Baron to his ornithopter in mid-flight. Yarbo startled as Baron appeared with the planeswalker, and then Teferi vanished back to his blimp. "Fly us to the new airbase," the wizard ordered, and the pilot turned the craft. Soon the coastline appeared, and Baron compared it to the maps he had received. Yarbo winged inland, arriving over the growing base in minutes. He put the machine down on a landing pad. People converged on Baron as he exited his craft. "Tell me here to take over this madhouse?" a man said as he rushed to the landing craft. "I am just an observer, here with Teferi's approval," Baron replied. "Another little job for me to handle?" the man shouted, and began stomping around the ornithopter, cursing. Several other members of the construction team hurried up and began unloading the baggage and gear. Baron noticed several tubes of plans being unloaded and turned to his pilot Yarbo for an explanation. "Since I was flying to pick you up, I was asked to bring a set of plans to Willem, the master builder." Yarbo looked at the apparent madman still stomping around in a circle. "That must be the man you're supposed to observe and copy." At Baron's look of ire, the pilot quickly grabbed his personal bag and ran after the withdrawing construction workers. Willem orbited back to Baron, and the wizard quickly schooled his face into its usual serious mien. The man was short, his skin red from recent exposure to the sun. He was heavy and in the rough work clothes of a skilled construction worker. His limbs were thick with muscle but lacked the definition of an athlete. His expression was angry but seemed directed at the world at large, not at Baron standing before him. "Willem's a name. I manage the circus you've come to see." He extended his hand as he spoke, and Baron gripped it. The wizard could feel the calluses and the strength behind them. "I am Baron. There's no need to dance attendance on me. I'm here to see how things are done. I'll just follow along, or perhaps you can gift a junior with me if you're busy." Baron wanted a smooth working relationship with the people he observed, and the impromptu war dance suggested he might spend more time fighting with Willem than learning from him. "If you want to learn about the whole operation, then you better stay with me," Willem answered, turning and beginning to walk to the construction site in the distance. "I'm tasked with putting this together, and I'm the best authority you could hope to find here. Besides, maybe you can help me." Baron walked quickly to catch up. "I've yelled long enough," William continued. "It's time I took a break." He chuckled, and Baron realized that William's temper was a tool as carefully wielded as any other in finishing the job. "Okay," Baron said. "Then perhaps you can answer a question for me. Why is a base for naval patrol so far from the sea?" They were almost 12 miles inland, and a range of low hills blocked easy access to the ocean. "We're an air base, and while we work in conjunction with surface units, none are based here." William walked the site perimeter. "We have sea access and is shipping from a river about a mile north of here." He pointed to a graded and graveled road that entered a screen of trees. "Remember that the former Eastern Air Base was burned by raiders? Rugged country if they come from the coast, and river adds miles to the trip inland. That's if they get past the fort we placed at the mouth." William spoke with pride as he considered the defensive arrangements. He stood on a low berm and gestured in all directions. "This is the best point to see everything," he said. Baron stood beside him and looked at the road that carried cargo from the river. A collection of tanks and piping sat in a depression. Baron noticed the fresh sod and the regularity of slope and realized the massive amounts of dirt must have been moved to create the dip. "Why did you lower the ground there?" Baron asked. The works served no obvious defensive purpose, and while the strange construction was hidden from a distance, aesthetics was an unlikely reason for so much labor. "That's where we'll be breaking down and refining the tufa," William replied as he looked on the workers connecting pipes and digging additional pits for storage. "The stuff it throws off is pretty volatile, and I decided that lowering the works would help protect the rest of the site in case of an accident. Also, some of the vapors can be dangerous, even if they don't burn, and the geometry of the digging sends the fumes out towards the trees instead of the hangars. Biggest trouble is making sure we had year-round drainage." William kicked at the turf that his men cut and laid down after they finished building the rise. "Ground can turn to quicksand in rain, and during part of the year there's a lot of standing water in this country. I didn't want a part-time lake interfering with refinery operations. But the hangars are the real heart of the operation and the bottleneck to the whole naval strategy," William said as they walked into the site. As they got closer, Baron began to grasp the sheer scale of the endeavor, and it was impressive, even when compared to the huge airsheds maintained for the dirigibles that flew under Urza's flags. "We already have set the foundations for 2 hangars," Willem said. "Each will be almost 1,000 feet long and nearly 200 feet high at the roof." Baron could barely grasp the scale at how huge the buildings would be. An army of thousands could be massed in each of the buildings with ornithopters flying inside. An entire fleet could be constructed from the wood used on site. Within the year, 10 acres would be domed over. "Why so large?" Baron asked. "Surely building on such a remote site makes this type of construction almost impossible." "Teferi states we're building for the ages, and we shouldn't let the flock of small craft we fly now limit the size of our facilities," Willem answered. Baron thought of Teferi's heavily armed whale of a command ship and wondered just how large the planeswalker's dreams were for his aerial fleet. "As you can see, we're setting up the door supports for both hangars before we begin construction on the walls." 4 sets of wooden structures laid out the corners of the hangars to come. They were all set on massive concrete pedestals. Men were completing work even as Baron watched. Huge cranes overtopped even the soaring gate towers. "Fortunately, we don't have adequate men or material to work on both structures at once with all the auxiliary buildings we're constructing." He gestured toward a barrack, the new wood looking raw even from Baron's distant viewpoint. "We can increase the flow of supplies. Maybe we can start construction on the second hangar." The field along one side of the proposed hangar was covered with stacks of lumber. Groups of workmen were bolting and fitting together huge sections of arches. As they drew closer, Baron saw 3 great cranes being positioned with the largest secured close to the field. "The timbers are all pre-cut, and once they're assembled, the large crane will pass them along to the other cranes, and then they'll all be raised at once." A network of narrow trenches crisscrossed the ground before them, and Willem turned to walk the length of the proposed structure. At Baron's glance, he briefly explained, "Drainage, remember? Eventually I'll receive a load of sewer pipe and will be able to fill them in. Right now it's trussed plank and jump over them." Willem demonstrated that he was able to navigate the hazard by leaping over a water-filled obstacle as Baron followed. "This is all very impressive, but I'm more interested in the problems you're having now than the plans you have for the future," Baron told him. "My problem is we're out in the middle of nowhere and everything has to be brought on site." Willem waved at the stacks of cut lumber. "We've trees all over this country and upriver, but because I can't get the men or materials, there's no way to cut and mill them." He pointed in the direction of the river. "Every stick and brick I need has to be barged from along the coast to the western ports, then hauled upriver and trundled along one road." He began to stomp heavily, showing his temper. "The stinking sea monsters and the bloody Keldons seem to sink about 1 in 3 before they can get here. You can imagine how that screws up my schedule." Baron wondered how many men were dying for that schedule. Willem clenched his fists in frustration. "Not that I have enough men for the materials I do get. I've scraped through every city to find decent construction workers, and I am cooking, gathering firewood, and trying to get around a lack of basic necessities." He was beginning to wave his arms now, and Baron prudently stepped away to avoid an unlikely blow. "We need a town and farms here. This base will never get done in time, or keep the blimps flying." "Surely have you communicated your problems with Teferi?" Baron placated the distraught man. It only provoked heavier stomping and wider gestures. "I'm not a fool. Of course I communicated my concerns to higher command, and I received 1 blimp for escort duty." Willem considered the blimp in the distance with narrowed eyes. "1 blimp that is available perhaps 2 weeks a month because it has to fly west for maintenance and rearming. I can barely get it to deliver my mail, much less protect my shipping. Rest of the air fleet is always out at sea or flying from western ports. Hell, this airbase is supposed to stop Keldon raids, and until I get it constructed, I'm naked." Willem seethed at the paradox that only after he constructed the airbase would shipments of building supplies become sure. The builder turned to Baron with intensity and decision plain in his eyes. "You want to see and do something important? Figure out how to guard my shipping, or there won't be much to see." Baron wondered how he could control a stretch of nearly deserted coast for hundreds of miles with only a single blimp and a heavy ornithopter. The blimp left on patrol before he could interview its crew. As he thought, he realized he didn't need to patrol the open sea. What needed air cover were the supply ships. Baron resolved to fly to the shipping port to get a handle on the supply problem. The morning was crisp as Baron walked to the ornithopter. The ground was covered with a light frost melting in the early sunlight. The shipping port of Kitani lay only an hour's flight away. It was time to take command of the supply line and expedite construction of the airbase. Teferi was counting on patrols flying out of the hangars, and their construction depended on timely shipments. Baron was going to convince the shippers to be bolder. As he clambered into his ornithopter, he wondered how angry he should be when he met the leaders of Kitani. He settled into his machine and it rose into the air swiftly. He looked at the airbase shrinking below him and saw once more how isolated it truly was. Baron flew over the sea of forest green and saw the gray of the ocean was beneath his craft. The coast was rocky, and Baron glanced at the waves beating on cliffs and narrow beaches. The violence of the waves evoked images of the Keldons waiting to attack these shores. The raiders must be stopped out at sea, or, like a tidal wave, they would wash over the coastal towns. This land was under his protection now. He thought on how to defend it as the flight continued. The first sign that something was wrong was a magical call that washed over him like a bucket of ice water. "This is Katani. We're under attack from Keldon raiders. At least 2 ships have landed and warriors are inside the city. Any League forces within range. This is Katani," the message repeated, an ethereal cry for help. Baron thought on how thinly stretched the League was and realized that he might be the only aid the city could expect. He accelerated to his maximum speed and wondered if he would reach Katani in time. The port city appeared in the distance. Smoke was beginning to rise, and Baron could tell that fires burned in several places. Soon, piers and docks showed, with many of the warehouses and boatyards engulfed in flame. 2 Keldon warships were tied up, their decks nearly deserted. The raiders must already be in town, Baron thought. But where are the League forces? Then he saw flames devouring wreckage on a beach outside the city. A blimp had crashed and was burning. The pile of debris suddenly shattered in a series of explosions as munitions cooked off. The flames were green and purple and rose towards the heavens. The concussion rocked Baron's ornithopter as he swooped to land. Then, flaming fragments struck his craft as he hit the ground in a controlled crash. Flaming brands fell everywhere, and he knew that his first priority was stopping the fires, or he'd lose the town. Baron threw himself outside and coughed as the smoke and haze swept over him. He steadied himself and cast his magic into the sky. His power ballooned over the town, and his mind peered down into the city streets. Fighting spread from house to house, but it was the fires that grabbed his attention. The figures of League Marines faded from his thoughts as he grounded his power into the sea. Now clouds filled the sky, and a sea streamed as water catapulted itself into Baron's dome of power. The sky was black and rumbling with thunder as more and more water collected in the air. The sky reached maximum saturation, and then it released as the storm began. Water poured in, driving rain that extinguished many of the fires in an instant. Fighting in the town slowed as men flattened under the force of the water. The most intense conflagrations were hit harder as Baron concentrated on them. Wind threw a river of water into buildings, and the hiss of steam could be heard over the storm. Baron turned his attention to the Keldon ships, but even as he concentrated and rallied his power, another magic user latched onto the storm. Fountains of power reared up on the docks and congealed into crystalline towers of magic. Baron could feel the sharp recoil as new magic speared the storm. He readied for a counterstroke, but the taste of the magic was so familiar. He realized that it reminded him of the League distress call. Lightning flowed from the storm into the crystals, and then arcs of energy sheared into the Keldon vessels. Decks seared and exploded as the power flowed over the ships. Sailors were charred as the Keldons rushed to respond. Baron felt admiration for the unknown ally, but he could feel the Keldon mages preparing a response as the League magic cleared the decks. "We have no time," Baron said as he detected more fighting within the city. People were dying. Baron resolved to finish the Keldon ships now. His mind clenched, and sheet lightning blinded him as he directed his will. The energy surge hit the crystal towers, and they detonated in a white flash, tearing through the Keldon ships. One craft exploded as Keldon magic interacted with Baron's strike, and debris flew everywhere. The other ship was gutted as a wound opened from stem to stern. Keldons died in agony as arcs of power plied over them. The sea filled the hull almost instantly, and the ship settled, its decks soon underwater. Baron grasped, bent over with strain as his mind disengaged from the sky. The storm continued, but the rain lightened as his will no longer directed the deluge. Baron straightened and headed into the city, preparing himself to meet the Keldons at close quarters. The streets were narrow, cobblestone, the buildings were stone and timber, and rain poured from tiled roofs. Here and there, structures smoldered and stank as the continuing rain drenched materials that had burned only minutes before. Baron turned a corner, and suddenly a sword flashed, but the attack stopped before Baron responded. A League Marine stood before him with a small target shield, his sword ready. Water poured from his helmet and armor as he saluted. "Sir, if you'd come with me, to the captain, sir." He turned and ran deeper into town. Baron followed, bemused by his instant acceptance. The Marine went past a series of barricades, and Baron could see corpses as they continued up the street. "How did you know I was coming?" Baron asked. The Marine paused to check around a corner before continuing. "We have scouts running the roofs, and they reported you landing," the Marine replied. We assumed that you had something to do with the storm. Baron nodded, but the Marine darted around the corner before he could continue. A long street lay before them, and a barricade was at each end. A company of men and war machines stood ready, and Baron got a glimpse of more soldiers in the other building. "The magic user from the beach," the scout reported to the officer in charge. Smoke and ash had darkened the officer's skin and uniform, and he grinned as Baron came up. "Excellent attack, Lord Baron," the officer said, noting the mage's surprise. "All naval and marine commands were notified of your arrival on the coast. Can we expect more reinforcements soon?" He peered behind Baron as if watching for more arrivals. "I'm afraid that no one else is with me," Baron stated. "I wouldn't count on any more help for quite some time." The officer swore and turned to consider the street. The Marines were armed with swords, shields, and light armor. Several stood ready with short bows, and Baron could see other bowmen creeping along the roofs on one side of the street. Baron regarded the war machines that he could see. Most were steel lance, the machines dripping water and some lubricants. Most were battered, and a few were missing limbs. Baron wondered how heavy the fighting had been. 2 machines towered over the rest. These were marine mantises, 6-legged bodies at waist height, and rearing towers for torsos that overtopped the Marines standing beside them. Their heads were insectile and large, with great mandibles covered with blood from today's fighting. Each had 2 arms folded against its body, and Baron could see flesh and cloth caught in the barbed surfaces. Then Baron detected the rising of familiar magic and walked closer to the barricade, stepping up onto a cart for a better view. Standing on the other side of the barricade was an athletic-looking Jamuraan woman with straight black hair. Baron could feel the power rushing through her frame. She was wearing a soaked blue cloak with an intricate black and white checker pattern across the front, and she looked tiny, nearly lost under the wet cloth. 2 Marines crouched next to her with large shields, tensed as if waiting to interpose themselves between her and danger. She flung her arms wide, and 3 crystalline tops appeared and raced down the street. Each top spun and glowed with inner fire as they dodged around bodies, heading for the open doors of a building midway down the road. Suddenly, shutters flew up, and Keldon warriors stood, revealed, hurling weapons and debris at the tops. 2 shattered, and the pieces tumbled to the ground before dissolving into the ether. Marine archers on the roofs of the buildings across the street shot volleys of arrows, sending warriors for cover. The surviving top curved into the entrance and exploded. Baron could see blue knives of crystalline magic flying back out of the entrance and thudding into buildings across the street. "Damn!" the woman swore as she crouched behind the shields her 2 Marines had raised. "I thought I'd get 2 inside." The Marine captain stepped forward and waved her down. "This is Alexei, Lord Baron," he said. "She was a mage on a blimp and had the misfortune to be shot down outside of town." "Luckily for you, I survived," she said hotly. "Wonder how you'd have done without me." She glowered briefly. "I've been making those swine pay for my crew all afternoon. If I could get some support, we could finish them now." The captain shrugged and turned apologetically to Baron. "We've pinned the raiders in the warehouse on one side of the street. We can't surround the building, and eventually the raiders are going to chop another entrance and escape." "Why not blow open the buildings and send your machines in under cover of fire from archers?" Baron asked. Alexei seemed powerful enough, and with his aid, they could peel the complex like a grape. "We thought of that, but the buildings contain essential supplies that explosions and heavy weapons would damage. The place has to be taken hand to hand, and storming the entrances is going to be bloody. I'd wait, but Alexei says there's at least 1 Keldon mage in there. He'll burn the place down, or soldiers will if we wait much longer. And without their ships, they're going to try and destroy the rest of the town. We'll attack in 5 minutes." The captain visibly tensed up as he prepared to give the order. "Wait, Captain," Baron said with authority. "If Alexei and I were to screen your attack until you entered the building, you could achieve maximum surprise and avoid casualties during your charge. Let me confer with Alexei for a moment, and then you can send your orders." The captain looked as if a division had appeared to support him and went to talk to his soldiers in better humor. "Screen them how?" Alexei whispered as the captain withdrew. "First, how many mages are in that building?" Baron asked. "There's just 1 opposing mage left, but those buildings are crammed with munitions, refined tooth oil, and essential naval stores. The first thing the mage will do is destroy it all, and perhaps the town, when we break in. We'll destroy the place ourselves if we throw anything too powerful. My tops and light knives are as strong as I dare to use." Alexei looked disgusted at the curbs to her power, thirst for battle. "I can prevent the Keldons from seeing the charge, and I can smother the efforts of just 1 mage," Baron said with confidence. "But I can't keep it up forever, so the Marines need to take that building quickly." "I'll push the attack myself," she said. "When will you be ready?" "As soon as I get into better viewing position," Baron replied and went to speak to the captain. Within minutes, new orders were flying, and Baron made his way to the roofs with the archers. He half crawled over the roof across from the main warehouse entrance. He seated himself and began to call up his power. He imagined the world as a painting. scenery coming into existence as he maneuvered his imaginary canvas into position in front of the warehouse. Archers poured from the roof down the stairwells as Baron signaled that his illusion was in place. The League Marines began to walk down the street quietly and carefully, a few soldiers left at the barricade making as much noise as possible to cover the sound of shuffling feet. Steel Ants and the Mantises were hand-guided for maximum silence. Baron felt the illusion firming and he began raising more power. The most difficult part was masking his magic so as to remain undetected. Baron infiltrated the warehouse with subtle spells, feeling the knot of energy that was the enemy mage. More power licked into the structure as Baron filled it with his awareness and will. Alexei was with the column below and she began that attack. Her power instantly created 5 spinning tops that darted into the entrance. They exploded into showers of blue knives that cut living flesh to ribbons. Steel Ants followed the tops and mounted internal barricades manned by dying Keldons, falling upon warriors rushing to reinforce. Baron's mind could follow the attack, and he watched as Keldons fell to pieces under metal mandibles. Shouting raiders rallied their men and charged the machines with swords and axes that smashed metal armor and removed mechanical limbs. Marines poured in and firmed the League lines. The Mantises moved to attack the Keldon leaders, and the core of the defense broke as long steel arms darted out, lopping off limbs and heads of those opposing the war machines. Baron felt the rush of power as the Keldon mage acted to turn the attack. Baron submerged the mage in a sea of stillness. The enemy mage drew more power but could initiate no spell against Baron's might. Alexei was inside now, and her spells lanced into the Keldon line. Knives of light cut a bloody swath into the building. Baron could feel the Keldon mage trying to cast a spell, any spell, but the power he had called to him had no outlet. The enemy wizard fell to his knees, clutched at his face, his eyes rolling back into his head. Smoke began to rise from the man's shoulders and limbs, and the Keldon magic user burst into brilliant red flames. Alexei and the other League forces gave the burning pile a wide berth as they closed on the remaining raiders. Then, just as suddenly as they had ignited, the brilliant fire went out, leaving only a huge black scorch mark on the floor. Baron rose and looked with his mortal eyes into the street and through the open doorway and shutters of the warehouse. Bodies lay everywhere, with streams of blood connecting the corpses. The League had won, but at the ruinous cost to the Marines in the town. Now more than ever, Baron was determined to stop the Keldons at sea. He already knew the first thing he would requisition from this town. He went to inform Alexei that she would now be serving under his command.